The Boeing 737 descended through turbulence over the Atlantic, its cabin lights dimmed for the red-eye flight from London to Miami. In row 14, seat C, sat a woman the other passengers had barely noticed during boarding. Designer suit, diamond earrings, a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. The flight attendants had pegged her as another tech executive or investment banker, the type who flew first class but had been bumped to coach due to overbooking. What they didn't know was that Zara Phoenix Ackaffer owned 3 defense contractors, 2 aerospace companies, and held patents on guidance systems currently flying in every major military aircraft in the Western world. What they couldn't see were the scars hidden beneath her silk blouse, shrapnel wounds from Fallujah, burn marks from an ejection seat that saved her life over the Hindu Kush. The trouble began 37 minutes into the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice carried an edge that made seasoned travelers look up from their tablets. "We've been instructed to alter our flight path. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." Through her window, Zara spotted them first, 4 FA-18 Super Hornets in tight formation, their navigation lights cutting through the darkness like angry stars. She'd flown enough combat sorties to recognize an intercept pattern when she saw one. This wasn't routine. This was containment. The businessman beside her was sweating now, muttering about terrorists and hijackers. A child began crying 3 rows back, but Zara remained perfectly still, her dark eyes tracking the fighter jets with professional interest. She recognized the squadron markings VFA-87 Golden Warriors, based out of Norfolk. Good pilots. She'd trained some of them herself, back when Lieutenant Commander Ackaffer was just another aviator trying to prove she belonged in a cockpit. Her phone buzzed. Impossible, they were at 38,000 feet. But the encrypted message was crystal clear. "Phoenix, you're needed topside. Full tactical authorization. Viper sends." Viper, Admiral Rebecca Viper Thornton, her former commanding officer, the woman who'd pinned wings on Zara's chest 15 years ago. The woman who knew exactly what Phoenix was capable of when the chips were down. As if summoned by destiny itself, a figure in naval dress blues appeared at the front of the cabin. Then another. Navy SEALs, moving with the fluid precision of apex predators through the narrow aisle. The man in the front raised his voice. "We're looking for Lieutenant Commander Zara Ackaffer, call sign Phoenix." Every head in the cabin turned toward row 14. The dismissive glances from the boarding process shifted to confusion, then growing recognition. The flight attendant who'd barely acknowledged her earlier now stood frozen, watching as the SEAL approached with something that looked remarkably like respect. "Ma'am," the operator said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that only comes from years of classified operations. "You need to come with us. We have a situation that requires your specific expertise." Zara closed her laptop with deliberate calm. Around her, passengers whispered and pointed, phones emerging despite the no electronics announcement. The woman they dismissed as just another suit was apparently important enough to divert a commercial airliner and scramble fighter jets. "What's the nature of the emergency, petty officer?" Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command, not the boardroom authority of a CEO, but something deeper, something forged in combat. "Ma'am, we have multiple aircraft down in the Mediterranean. Unknown hostiles using some kind of electronic warfare system that's jamming everything we've got. Our pilots are flying blind, and the enemy is picking them off one by one." He paused, his expression grim. "Admiral Thornton says you're the only pilot who's ever successfully countered this type of jamming. She says you did it over Afghanistan in 09. The passengers were completely silent now, hanging on every word. The businessman beside her stared in open-mouthed shock. The child had stopped crying. Zara stood, her movements fluid and purposeful. "How many birds are we talking about, and what's their last known position?" 12 F-35s from the Eisenhower, ma'am. They went dark 47 minutes ago, approximately 200 nautical miles southwest of Crete. The jamming field is massive, nearly 50 square miles of dead airspace. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. I'll need access to your tactical communications, and someone needs to prep a bird. I assume we have a carrier in the area. Yes, ma'am. The Reagan is standing by. We have an FA-18F Super Hornet fueled and ready on deck, loaded with the latest electronic countermeasures suite. The SEAL handed her a tablet showing satellite imagery of the Mediterranean. Dark clouds swirled over empty ocean, but Zara's trained eye picked out the subtle signatures that others would miss. The electromagnetic disturbances that created ghost images on radar, the thermal anomalies that suggested cloaked aircraft. She'd seen this before. Operation Bright Shadow, Afghanistan, 2009. A nightmare scenario where enemy forces had somehow acquired next-generation jamming technology, creating a bubble of electronic silence that had already claimed 3 aircraft and their pilots. Back then, she'd been Lieutenant Akaffer, flying her first combat deployment, desperate to prove herself in a world that questioned whether women belonged in fighter jets. She developed an unorthodox solution, flying completely analog, using visual references and dead reckoning to penetrate the jamming field. The cost had been everything. Her aircraft severely damaged, her ejection seat triggered at barely survivable altitude. 6 months in the hospital, another year in physical therapy. But she'd broken through the enemy's electronic shield and painted the targets for the strike package that followed. Now, 15 years later, the same technology had returned. And apparently, she was still the only pilot who knew how to beat it. As the SEAL escorted her toward the aircraft's exit door, the passengers watched in stunned silence. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled stop at Naval Air Station Sigonella in Sicily. This is an unusual circumstance. Through the windows, the Super Hornets maintained their escort formation, their pilots undoubtedly wondering who was important enough to justify this level of operational security. The Boeing began its descent toward the darkened Mediterranean, carrying its cargo of confused civilians and one woman whose past was about to collide violently with the present. In the reflection of her window, Zara saw not the billionaire CEO that others perceived, but the pilot she'd never stopped being. Phoenix was about to rise again. The electronic warfare threat in the Mediterranean represented more than just a tactical challenge. Intelligence reports suggested the technology had evolved far beyond what she'd faced in Afghanistan. The enemy wasn't just jamming communications anymore. They were creating false targets, phantom aircraft that appeared solid on radar until missiles passed harmlessly through empty air. Admiral Thornton's emergency briefing crackled through the SEAL's encrypted radio as they prepared for landing in Sicily. Phoenix, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. The jamming field is expanding, and we're tracking at least 30 hostile aircraft operating inside the bubble. Conventional tactics are useless. Our pilots can't tell friend from foe. Zara studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating angles and approach vectors. The enemy had learned from Afghanistan, adapted their technology to counter traditional electronic warfare techniques. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed no one remembered the old ways, the methods pilots used before they became dependent on digital systems. "Viper, I need complete tactical autonomy once I'm airborne," she transmitted. "No data link, no GPS, no digital assistance of any kind. Strip the aircraft down to basic analog instruments." "Phoenix, that's incredibly dangerous. You'll be flying blind into a combat zone." "No, Admiral. I'll be flying like we used to, before we let computers do our thinking for us." As Naval Air Station Sigonella appeared below them, Zara felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in that electronic maze over the Mediterranean, American pilots were fighting for their lives, their technological advantages turned against them. The woman in row 14 was gone. In her place sat Lieutenant Commander Zara Phoenix Okafor, about to attempt the most dangerous mission of her career. The Super Hornet waiting on the tarmac at Sigonella looked like a predator in the pre-dawn darkness, its twin engines already spooling up as maintenance crews performed final checks. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the crew chief, approached Zara with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity written across his weathered face. "Ma'am, I've been working these birds for 23 years," he said, his Louisiana drawl thick with concern. "What you're asking us to do, it's like asking me to remove a pilot's eyes and ears." Zara nodded, understanding his reluctance. "Chief, I need you to disable every digital system that could be compromised by electronic interference. Heads-up display, data link, GPS navigation, digital radio, all of it." "Ma'am, that leaves you with basic analog instruments, a magnetic compass, and a backup radio that's probably older than my youngest daughter." "Exactly what I need, Chief." Rodriguez shook his head but began issuing orders to his team. As they worked, stripping away decades of technological advancement, Zara walked around the aircraft, running her hands along the airframe like a pianist testing keys before a concert. The Super Hornet was a magnificent machine, twin F414 engines capable of pushing 44,000 pounds of aircraft through the sky at Mach 1.8. But without its electronic brain, it became something more primitive and, in some ways, more honest. A machine that responded only to the pilot's skill, not their ability to interpret computer displays. "Phoenix, this is Viper." Admiral Thornton's voice came through the hangar's speakers. "Intelligence has identified the jamming source. It's a modified cargo aircraft, probably Russian or Chinese origin, orbiting at the center of the interference pattern. But it's protected by at least 2 squadrons of fighter aircraft." "Understood. What's the tactical picture?" "Chaos. We've lost contact with 12 F-35s, and the USS Eisenhower is reporting multiple surface contacts that don't match any known vessel configurations. Whatever technology they're using, it's creating false returns on every sensor we have." Zara studied the printed charts spread across a folding table, paper maps marked with grease pencil, the kind of navigation aids that predated satellite systems. "Admiral, I need a weather report for the target area. Visual conditions only. Broken clouds at 8,000 feet, visibility 15 miles. Sunrise in 4 hours. "Perfect, she could work with that." As the maintenance team finished their modifications, Zara suited up in the cramped ready room. The flight suit felt familiar despite the years spent in boardrooms, the weight of survival gear a comforting presence across her shoulders. But as she reached for her helmet, Chief Rodriguez appeared with something unexpected. "Ma'am, I took the liberty of retrieving this from storage." He held up a flight helmet painted in faded desert camouflage, with a distinctive phoenix rising from flames stenciled on both sides. "This was yours, wasn't it? From the Afghanistan deployment." Zara stared at the helmet, memories flooding back. The last time she'd worn it, she'd been unconscious, falling through empty sky over the Hindu Kush Mountains. "Where did you find this?" "It's been in the Squadron Museum at Norfolk for the past 15 years. Admiral Thornton had it flown in on the same transport that brought the SEALs. She said you might want it back." The helmet felt surprisingly light in her hands, despite the weight of history it carried. Inside, faded letters spelled out her name and call sign, written in her own handwriting on the day she'd first strapped into an FA-18. As she pulled it on, the years seemed to fall away. The boardrooms and corporate jets, the patents and defense contracts, all of it faded into background noise. She was Phoenix again, the pilot who'd learned to fly by instinct when technology failed. "Phoenix, you're cleared for launch." The tower's voice crackled through her ancient radio, overlaid with static from the expanding jamming field. Be advised, all electronic navigation aids are unreliable beyond 50 nautical miles south of your position. Copy tower. Phoenix is switching to manual flight controls. She advanced the throttles, feeling 44,000 pounds of thrust push her back into the ejection seat. The Super Hornet rolled forward, its engines painting the pre-dawn darkness with twin cones of superheated air. As she taxied toward the runway, Zara caught sight of herself in the aircraft's mirrors, a middle-aged black woman in a fighter jet, about to attempt something that military doctrine said was impossible. But she'd built her career on proving doctrine wrong. The takeoff was perfect, the Super Hornet lifting into the Mediterranean dawn like a prayer made of titanium and jet fuel. Below, Sicily fell away into memory, replaced by endless blue water that reflected the morning sky like a mirror. But as she flew south, the first signs of electronic interference began to creep into her instruments. The GPS display flickered once, twice, then went dark. Her radio filled with static. The datalink screen showed nothing but snow. 50 miles from the target area, her aircraft became analog. No computers, no satellites, no electronic assistance. Just Phoenix, her instincts, and a machine that responded only to her touch. Ahead, somewhere in that maze of false signals and phantom targets, American pilots were dying. Time to earn her call sign all over again. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly below as Phoenix approached the edge of the electronic warfare zone, her Super Hornet cutting through morning air that seemed deceptively peaceful. But her analog instruments told a different story. The magnetic compass began oscillating wildly, and static filled every radio frequency. All stations, this is Phoenix entering the interference field. Her transmission disappeared into white noise, swallowed by whatever technology was generating the electronic maze ahead. She was alone now, truly alone, in a way that modern pilots rarely experienced. No GPS to tell her position, no radar to show targets, no data link to coordinate with friendly forces. Just the weight of the stick in her hands and the sound of twin engines behind her. The first sign of enemy presence came as a flicker in her peripheral vision, a silver glint against the blue that vanished the moment she turned to look directly at it. Then another, off her port wing. The jamming technology was good, but it couldn't hide the basic physics of sunlight reflecting off metal. Phoenix rolled inverted and pulled through, trading altitude for energy as she dove toward the deck. If the enemy was using electronic camouflage, they'd expect her to fly high and trust her instruments. Instead, she'd go low, use the water as a backdrop to silhouette any aircraft against the sky. At 500 feet above the Mediterranean, the world became visceral. No computer could replicate the sensation of flying this close to the surface, where every slight movement translated into life or death. Her aircraft's wake left a visible trail in the water below, a testament to the raw physics of flight. Then she saw them. The enemy aircraft were unlike anything in Western inventories, sleek, angular shapes that seemed to bend light around their edges. Stealth technology taken to its logical extreme, creating machines that were more shadow than substance. But flying at wave height, Phoenix could see their heat distortion, the subtle ripples in the air that no electronic countermeasure could disguise. She counted 12 hostiles in a loose combat spread, their formation designed to create overlapping fields of fire. But they were flying predictably, relying too heavily on their electronic advantages. They'd forgotten the first rule of air combat: the pilot who sees first lives. Phoenix selected her first target, an angular fighter trailing the formation by several hundred meters. No radar lock, no missile guidance system, just her eyes, her instincts, and an AIM-9X Sidewinder that would home on infrared signature alone. The shot was perfect. The enemy aircraft simply vanished in a ball of flame and debris, its pilot never knowing what had killed him. But the explosion gave away Phoenix's position, and suddenly the peaceful Mediterranean became a killing field. Tracers filled the air around her, streams of cannon fire from enemies she couldn't see on any instrument. But she could see the bullets themselves, bright lines against the blue, and her muscle memory kicked in. Bank left, pull through, extend, and separate. The basic geometry of survival. Mayday, mayday, this is. Does anyone copy? A voice broke through the static, American, desperate. One of the missing F-35 pilots was still alive, somewhere in the electronic maze. Phoenix keyed her radio. American aircraft, this is Phoenix. I'm in the interference field, flying visual. What's your position? Phoenix, thank God. We're being hunted. These things come out of nowhere and our systems can't track them. Johnson and Martinez are already down. Stay low, stay fast, and trust your eyes. The jamming can fool your instruments, but it can't hide basic physics. Look for heat distortion, shadow inconsistencies, anything that doesn't belong. As if to emphasize her point, another enemy fighter materialized directly ahead, its pilot apparently as surprised as she was. The two aircraft flashed past each other at a combined speed of over 1,300 miles per hour, close enough that Phoenix could see the other pilot's helmet. She pulled into a vertical climb, trading speed for altitude, then rolled over the top and dove back toward the deck. The enemy pilot followed, but he was flying by computer, trusting his instruments to show him where she was. His mistake. At the bottom of her dive, Phoenix pulled hard left and extended, using the water as camouflage. The enemy fighter, following his radar display instead of his eyes, flew straight into the Mediterranean at 400 knots. Two down. But the odds were still overwhelming. Somewhere in this electronic nightmare, at least 20 more enemy fighters were hunting for her, and they had her vastly outnumbered. Then she remembered Afghanistan, and Operation Bright Shadow, and the lesson she'd learned about fighting an enemy that controlled the electromagnetic spectrum. Sometimes the best weapon against advanced technology was no technology at all. American fighters, this is Phoenix. I'm going to try something. Stay close to the water and watch for my smoke trail. She pulled her Super Hornet into a shallow climb, just high enough to be visible from a distance, and activated her aircraft's smoke system, a training aid designed to make aircraft visible during air shows. A bright white trail began streaming behind her, impossible to hide or disguise. Within seconds, every enemy fighter in the area was converging on her position, drawn by the visible target like moths to flame. Exactly what she wanted. All American aircraft, all aircraft, this is Phoenix. I'm about to paint every hostile in this sector. Watch the sky and engage targets of opportunity. She pulled hard left, her smoke trail describing a perfect arc against the blue Mediterranean sky. Then right, then into a climbing spiral, creating a three-dimensional advertisement of her position. The enemy took the bait. As they converged on her smoke trail, their own electronic camouflage worked against them, causing them to appear as targets to each other's sensors. Friendly fire erupted across the formation as the jamming technology that was meant to protect them instead created chaos. Phoenix dove back to the deck as the sky above erupted in explosions, enemy fighters destroying each other in their eagerness to engage what they thought was a helpless target. When the smoke cleared, both literally and figuratively, the electromagnetic interference began to fade. Without the concentrated formation of enemy aircraft maintaining the jamming field, normal radio communications slowly returned. Phoenix, this is Badger 11. We've got you on scope. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's F-35 appeared off Phoenix's starboard wing, her aircraft scarred but intact. 3 more F-35s joined the formation, survivors of what should have been a massacre. Badger Flight, this is Phoenix. How many birds do we have operational? 4 F-35s still flying, and we're tracking at least 3 more that went down with survivors. But Phoenix, Chen's voice carried a note of awe. Who are you? I mean, I know your call sign, but nobody flies like that anymore. Nobody fights analog in a digital world. Phoenix looked at her reflection in the cockpit glass, seeing not the billionaire CEO that had boarded a commercial airliner 12 hours earlier, but the pilot she'd never stopped being. Badger 11, I'm just someone who remembers when flying meant more than reading computer screens. But even as she said it, Phoenix knew their mission was far from over. The main jamming source, that mysterious cargo aircraft Admiral Thornton had mentioned, was still out there, still broadcasting its electronic poison across the Mediterranean. And somewhere in that maze of false signals and phantom returns, more American pilots were fighting for their lives. The reformed flight of 5 aircraft Phoenix in her analog Super Hornet and 4 scarred F-35s flew northeast toward the source of the remaining interference. Without the concentrated jamming field, their electronic systems had partially recovered, but the main transmitter was still creating a dome of chaos roughly 30 miles in diameter. Phoenix, this is Viper. Admiral Thornton's voice came through clearly for the first time in hours. Outstanding work breaking up that fighter screen. We're tracking the primary jamming source at bearing 045, range approximately 40 miles. It appears to be a large aircraft, possibly a converted transport, with significant electronic warfare capabilities. Lieutenant Chen's voice joined the conversation. Admiral, we're reading at least 6 more hostiles providing top cover for the jamming aircraft. Our systems are degraded but functional at this range. Phoenix studied her paper charts, calculating intercept courses using methods that predated digital computers. Viper, what's the current position of friendly forces? USS Reagan is 70 miles northeast of your position. USS Eisenhower is holding station approximately 100 miles southwest. Both carriers have launched additional CAP, but they're maintaining distance from the interference field. Smart, no point in risking more aircraft until they understood exactly what they were dealing with. As they approached the edge of the main jamming field, Phoenix's instruments began failing again. But this time, she was ready for it. She'd already calculated their course, marked visual checkpoints, and briefed the F-35 pilots on analog, flying techniques their instructors probably hadn't covered. Badger Flight, as we enter the interference zone, switch to backup radios and maintain visual formation on my aircraft. Ignore your instruments. They're about to start lying to you. The transition into the jamming field was like flying through an invisible wall. One moment their radios were crystal clear, the next filled with static and false communications. GPS displays flickered and died. Radar screens showed targets that couldn't possibly exist. But Phoenix had been here before. She recognized the electronic signature, the particular way this jamming technology distorted reality. This wasn't just Russian or Chinese equipment. This was next-generation warfare, probably years ahead of anything Western intelligence had cataloged. Contact bearing 270 high. Chen's voice crackled through the static. I've got visual on a large aircraft, looks like a converted airliner, multiple escort fighters in close formation. Phoenix spotted the target, a massive aircraft that looked like a commercial jetliner stretched to accommodate additional equipment. Antenna arrays covered its fuselage like metallic cancer, and she could see the heat distortion from powerful electronic systems working at maximum output. The escort fighters were a different story. These weren't the angular stealth fighters they'd encountered earlier. These were conventional aircraft, probably Su-35s or their equivalent, flying in tight defensive formation around the jamming platform. Badger Flight, we need to take out that transmitter aircraft, but those escorts are going to make it complicated. I'm going to try something unorthodox. Phoenix pulled her Super Hornet into a steep climb, ascending directly toward the enemy formation. It was tactically insane. Climbing into a superior number of enemy fighters with no electronic support was the kind of mistake that killed pilots on their first combat mission. But Phoenix wasn't a rookie, and she wasn't planning to fight fair. At 15,000 feet, she rolled inverted and pulled through, diving directly at the enemy formation at maximum speed. The escort fighters reacted exactly as she'd hoped. They turned toward her, abandoning their protective positions around the jamming aircraft to engage what appeared to be a suicidal attack. Badger flight now, the escorts are off station, hit the transmitter. The four F-35s, flying low and using the sea as backdrop, approached the massive jamming aircraft from its blind spot. Without its fighter escort, the converted airliner was helpless, a flying antenna farm with no defensive systems. Four AIM-120 missiles streaked across the Mediterranean, their combined warheads tearing the jamming aircraft apart in a spectacular explosion that lit up the morning sky. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the primary transmitter died, the electromagnetic interference collapsed like a house of cards. Radios came alive with clear communications, GPS systems reacquired satellites, and radar displays began showing accurate tactical pictures. But Phoenix still had 6 very angry enemy fighters converging on her position. "Phoenix, this is Badger 1-1. We're coming to assist." "Negative, Badger flight. You've done your job. RTB to the Reagan and get your aircraft checked out." Phoenix rolled her Super Hornet back to level flight and faced the incoming fighters. 6 against 1 was terrible odds, but she'd been in worse situations. And now, with the jamming field down, she had an advantage the enemy didn't expect. Her aircraft's electronic systems came back online all at once, decades of technological advancement returning in a flood of data. But Phoenix had learned something important in the past few hours. Sometimes the old ways were better. She switched her displays back to standby mode and flew by visual reference, using her regained electronic systems only for targeting and missile guidance. The enemy pilots, after hours of flying in electronic chaos, were probably overwhelmed by the sudden return of normal systems operation. The first Su-35 died to an AIM-120 fired at maximum range, its pilot apparently unaware that Phoenix's radar had reacquired lock capability. The second fell to a perfectly timed gun's kill, as Phoenix used her superior energy management to get inside the enemy's turning circle. 4 remaining hostiles, but now they were learning to respect their opponent. The dogfight that followed was classic air-to-air combat. No electronic trickery, no phantom targets, just pilots and machines testing each other against the fundamental laws of physics and aerial warfare. Phoenix had spent 15 years away from the cockpit, but her muscle memory was perfect, her instincts sharp as razor wire. One by one, the enemy fighters fell. Superior training, better tactics, and hard-won experience proved more valuable than numerical advantage. When the last hostile aircraft hit the water in a spreading pattern of debris and fuel, Phoenix found herself alone in the quiet sky above the Mediterranean, her Super Hornet's engines the only sound in a world that had suddenly become peaceful again. "Phoenix, this is Viper." Admiral Thornton's voice carried a note of something that might have been pride. "Outstanding work. All hostiles are down, and we're receiving emergency beacons from 7 down friendly aircraft. Search and rescue is already airborne." Phoenix checked her fuel gauges, enough to make it back to the Reagan, but not by much. The extended combat had burned through her reserves faster than planned. "Viper, Phoenix is RTB to the carrier. Fuel state is becoming critical." "Roger, Phoenix. You're cleared for immediate recovery aboard USS Reagan. The deck is ready for you." As she flew northeast toward the carrier, Phoenix reflected on the past few hours. She'd started the day as a corporate executive on a commercial flight and ended it as a combat pilot who just won the most important air battle of her career. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself and to the world: that experience, instinct, and old-fashioned flying skills still mattered in an age of digital warfare. The USS Reagan appeared on the horizon, its flight deck a welcome sight after hours of combat. But as Phoenix approached for landing, she realized that this mission had changed more than just the tactical situation in the Mediterranean. It had changed her. The trap landing on USS Reagan's pitching deck was perfect. Phoenix's Super Hornet catching the three-wire and decelerating from 150 knots to zero in less than 2 seconds. As the engine spooled down and deck crews chalked the wheels, she realized she was shaking, not from fear or adrenaline, but from something deeper. It had been 15 years since she'd felt this alive. Admiral Rebecca Viper Thornton was waiting on the flight deck, her silver hair whipping in the wind from the carrier's movement. At 62, she still carried herself with the bearing of a combat pilot, though she'd hung up her flight suit 5 years earlier to take command of the Sixth Fleet. As Phoenix climbed down from the cockpit, Thornton approached with something that looked remarkably like a grin. "Outstanding work, Phoenix. That was some of the finest flying I've seen in 30 years of naval aviation." "Thank you, Admiral, but I think we need to talk about what we encountered out there." They walked toward the carrier's island superstructure, past rows of aircraft being prepared for the next launch cycle. The Reagan was a floating city of 6,000 souls, but it felt strangely quiet after the chaos of aerial combat. In the Admiral's cabin, surrounded by charts and tactical displays, Phoenix stripped off her flight helmet and ran her hands through sweat-matted hair. The woman who'd boarded a commercial airliner 18 hours earlier felt like someone from another lifetime. "Zara," Admiral Thornton said, using her given name for the first time in 15 years, "what you did out there, breaking that jamming field using analog techniques, turning their own technology against them. It's going to change how we think about electronic warfare." Phoenix studied the tactical display showing the Mediterranean, now clear of hostile contacts. "Admiral, that technology they were using, it's at least 10 years ahead of anything in our inventory. Whoever built those jamming systems and those stealth fighters, they've been preparing for this kind of engagement for a long time. Which brings me to why I really had you extracted from that airliner." Thornton activated a secure terminal, her clearance codes unlocking files marked with classifications Phoenix hadn't seen since her Pentagon days. "This wasn't an isolated incident. We've had similar attacks in the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Baltic. Someone is testing our electronic warfare capabilities systematically." The files painted a disturbing picture. Over the past 18 months, advanced electronic warfare systems had appeared in conflict zones around the world, always protected by fighters using stealth technology that didn't match any known aircraft. American and Allied forces had suffered increasing casualties as their technological advantages were systematically neutralized. "They're not just testing our capabilities," Phoenix said, studying the data. "They're training their pilots to fight against our standard tactics. Every engagement gives them more information about how we respond to electronic warfare." "Exactly, and until today, we didn't have an effective counter-strategy." Admiral Thornton pulled up footage from Phoenix's mission, gun camera video, and satellite imagery, showing the destruction of the jamming aircraft and escort fighters. "You just proved that advanced technology can be defeated by superior tactics and pilot skill. But we need more than one pilot who can fly analog in a digital world." Phoenix leaned back in her chair, understanding the implication. "You want me to train others? I want you to revolutionize how we think about air combat. Your corporate background gives you unique insight into how these systems work, and your combat experience shows you how to defeat them. We need a new doctrine, new training methods, new ways of thinking about aerial warfare." Through the porthole, Phoenix could see the Mediterranean stretching to the horizon, peaceful now, but still hiding the wreckage of the morning's battle. Somewhere out there, rescue helicopters were plucking survivors from life rafts, young pilots who owed their lives to lessons learned in a different kind of war 15 years earlier. Admiral, I built my company specifically to stay close to military aviation. Every patent I hold, every system I've developed, it's all been about making pilots more effective, more survivable. And now you can do that directly. The offer hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. A return to active duty, a chance to shape the next generation of naval aviators, an opportunity to prepare American pilots for a new kind of warfare that relied more on skill than technology. But it would mean giving up everything she'd built in the civilian world. The companies, the patents, the billions of dollars in defense contracts, trading a corner office for a cockpit, boardroom presentations for briefing rooms. There's something else, Admiral Thornton said quietly. We've identified the likely source of these advanced systems. It's a joint program between three nations that have been developing counter-stealth and electronic warfare capabilities specifically designed to neutralize Western air superiority. She handed Phoenix another classified folder. Inside were satellite images of massive research facilities, production lines turning out the angular fighters they'd encountered, and organizational charts showing collaboration between military-industrial complexes that had never worked together before. They call it Project Shadowfall. The goal is complete negation of American and NATO air power through advanced electronic warfare and stealth technology. What you encountered today was just a field test. Phoenix studied the images, her engineer's mind automatically analyzing the production capabilities and technological specifications. The scope was breathtaking, a comprehensive effort to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. How long do we have? Intelligence estimates suggest full deployment within 18 months. They're planning to equip 12 nations with these systems, creating a network of electronic warfare capabilities that could effectively neutralize our air power across multiple theaters simultaneously. The implications were staggering. American military doctrine had relied on air superiority for decades. Without control of the skies, ground forces would be vulnerable, naval operations compromised, and the entire structure of Western defense strategy would need fundamental revision. Admiral, if I accept your offer, I need complete autonomy to develop new training methods. And I need access to the best pilots in the fleet, not just the ones who look good on paper, but the ones who can think outside the box. Done. And I need resources to develop new tactics and techniques. This isn't just about training pilots to fly without computers. It's about creating a new philosophy of air combat. Whatever you need. Phoenix looked out at the carrier's flight deck, where young aviators were preparing for their next missions, probably unaware of how dramatically their world was about